Hey second graders, it's Miss Barnett. Today we're going to continue to learn about Cinderella stories from around the world. So let's review some of the different stories that we have. There is a Cinderella story from Thailand, a Cinderella story from Nigeria, a Cinderella story from Ireland, and actually we're going to be reading this story today, a Cinderella story from Zimbabwe, one from Mexico, which is what we read yesterday, Adelita, a Cinderella story from France, a Cinderella story from Greece, one from China, from Egypt, from Iraq, a Native American story, one from Los Angeles, one from Korea, one from Russia, one from Poland, and there's many, many more. So I encourage you to keep looking up those Cinderella stories from home and see if there's one that's from your culture, one that you relate to or your parents relate to. So today I'm going to read the book The Irish Cinderlad. In Ireland, in the old times, there lived a lad named Beacon. His mother gave him this name the day he was born, for Beacon is Irish for little one. It's fitting, she said, for such a wee thing. His mother loved him all the same and carried Beacon around in her egg basket for safekeeping. Whenever he opened his mouth, she spooned milk porridge into it, and Beacon began to grow. Red hair flamed on his head. His skinny legs got rounder, and his tiny feet got longer until his toes poked out of the basket. Although the rest of him stayed small, his feet kept on growing. By the time Beacon was 13 years old, they were so large he'd splash a puddle dry just by stepping in it. Still, Beacon's worries were few enough until his mother died. As I read this, you might have noticed there's a similarity between the Irish Cinderlad and the Cinderella stories that we've read. In all of these, the mother has died, which is extremely sad. His father was a peddler and often away selling needles and pins and bringing back whatever was needed. To Beacon's astonishment, one evening he came home with a new wife and her 3 nearly grown daughters. "Now, you've a mom again and 3 big sisters besides to watch out for you," his father explained. Watch they did. All 3 sisters spied on him, and if anything went amiss, they shrieked, "Blame little Bigfoot," for that is what they called him. "We'd be better off without that good-for-nothing boy," said their mother. At last she told Beacon, "Your big feet are always in the way. It's time you went off to tend to the cows." "Cows are fine company," Beacon replied, "but I've heard talk of a mean speckled bull. A kick from him can send a man sailing over the rainbow." "Stop fretting," snapped his stepmother. "Not even a cow could mistake you for a man." So, what you might have noticed from this part right here is this is another similarity between the other Cinderella stories. In the original Disney Cinderella story that you're familiar with, the dad remarries and he gets and the Cinderella character gets step siblings and a stepmother. In this story, the big difference is that there's 1 extra step sister. So there's 3 stepsisters and a stepmother instead of just 3 evil characters. But the number 3 is still in both of these stories. So let's keep going. So Beacon became a herd boy. Each day at sunup, he led his father's 3 cows up the hill to graze on purple clover. At sundown, he brought them home again. In between, he sat under an oak tree and kept a sharp eye out for the speckled bull. One misty morning, Beacon heard a bellow louder than a thunderclap. Rocks rattled down the hill, cows galloped about in circles, and Beacon scampered up the oak tree. When he dared to look, it was right into the angry eyes of an enormous bull. The creature's face was white, but splashed with rusty red, like the freckles on Beacon's nose. The hoofs were big and broad like Beacon's feet. He twitched his long tail and pawed the ground, ready to knock the tree and the boy with it. Quickly, Beacon stretched out his hand and scratched him behind the ear, in the place that cows like best. "We could be cousins, you and I," said Beacon, jumping down, "for we look to be patched together from the same odds and ends." The bull lowered his head with the wicked curved horns, but instead of tossing Beacon, he nuzzled his cheek. For that moment, the bull and the boy were fast friends. Beacon told of his troubles while the speckled bull listened, chewing thoughtfully. So, as you can see from this part of the story, there is a big fiction part. This bull is a talking animal. "The sisters tattle," said Beacon one day. "The stepmother scolds. I'm fed only scraps and will soon shrink down to nothing." "Not while I am about," rumbled the bull. "Look into my left ear and pull out what you find there." Beacon wasn't surprised to hear the bull talk, for he had begun to suspect that his friend was no ordinary animal. Seeing something white poking from the animal's ear, Beacon tugged on it. Out came a tablecloth, and wrapped inside it was a whole meal. There was bread and cheese and sausage. There were boiled turnips, a partridge pie, and oaten cakes, sticky with honey. "Eat what you will," said the speckled bull. Beacon ate every crumb and licked his fingers clean. Then he rolled up the cloth and tucked it back into the bull's ear. Each day thereafter, Beacon had a noontime meal fit for a chief. Each evening, he turned down the crust of bread his stepmother set out for supper. "That boy's filling his stomach some way," the woman told his oldest daughter. "Tomorrow, go yourself up to the pasture and find out how." The girl did just that, hiding behind a bush to watch Beacon while he watched the cows. At midday, the speckled bull arrived. She saw Beacon pat him, put a hand to his ear, and pull out a feast. "The bull is feeding Beacon," she whispered to her mother that night. "I saw it." "Then we shall butcher that old speckled bull," declared the mother. "He'll make a grand stew for us." Eyes closed, Beacon nodded on the hearth, but his ears were open, and he heard every word that was said. At the first light of day, he ran to warn his friend. So, at this point, I want you right now to start thinking about how this story is similar and different to the Disney Cinderella story. I want you to answer this question, and you can say it out loud or write it on a piece of paper. How is the magic in this story different than the magic in the Disney Cinderella story? I'll give you a minute to think about it. So, in the Disney Cinderella story, there's a fairy godmother who, waves her wand and makes magic happen. In this, there's a magic bull who is able to create feasts of food from his ear. So very different so far. But those evil step-siblings and stepmother want to butcher the bull, meaning they want to kill the bull. The bull snorted, "I'll not end in a soup pot. Get on my back, lad, and we'll soon be gone from here." With Beacon holding tight to his horns, the bull trotted up the hill, over a steep mountain, and through a wood of beech trees. In a meadow, many days from home, the bull stopped. "Here we bid goodbye," he said, "for it is here that the gray bull and I must fight." "No!" Beacon threw his arms around the bull's neck. "The gray bull shall kill me, for my fate has been foretold. When I am dead, you are to twist off my tail." Beacon stared at him in horror. "Never!" "Wear my tail as a belt. Use it when you need my help the most." The bull nudged Beacon gently. "Do as I say." Early the next morning, a bull, gray as the sky overhead, came charging through the trees. The two bulls locked horns and fought throughout the rainy day. When evening came, the gray bull had disappeared, and the speckled bull lay dead. Beacon sat beside his friend all night. At dawn, remembering the bull's words, he cautiously twisted his tail. It spun around in a full circle and came off at once. Beacon wrapped the tail twice about his waist and then, for the last time, reached into the animal's ear. He pulled out the tablecloth, now bare of food and fresh as new, and carefully covered the bowl. Slain, he whispered, which is the Irish word for goodbye. Alone, Beacon continued his journey, walking down a rocky ridge and into a valley. The stones cut his bare feet, and he was grateful when a gentleman on horseback offered him a ride. "Where are you bound, lad?" the man asked. Beacon shrugged. "I'm going anywhere at all." "You could come along with me," the gentleman suggested. "I am in want of a cowherd." "Herding is what I do best," answered Beacon. "I've this horse, 4 cows, and 3 sheep, and a donkey, and all of them good-natured. What's bad-tempered is on the other side of my wall, in Arhak." "A giant?" Beacon exclaimed. "I'd like to see one." "Take warning," the gentleman waggled his finger. "My last herd boy, a lad far bigger and stronger than you." Although he knew quite well what was meant, Beacon said at once, "I'll have the job anyways, if it please you." Beacon became a herder again, sleeping in a cowshed by night and taking the horse, the cows, the sheep, and the donkey out to graze by day. When they had chomped and chewed up everything in the gentleman's field, Beacon climbed the stone wall to see what grew on the other side. Before him spread acres of grassy meadows and orchards of apple trees bowed with fruit. Beacon knocked stones from the wall until it was low enough for the animals to step over. "Help yourselves," he told them. "That Arhak has so much, he won't mind sharing." Then Beacon climbed a tree to pick an apple for himself. "Got you!" a voice bellowed. A sword slashed through the tree, chopping limbs into kindlings and sending Beacon tumbling to the ground. "Hardly a bite on your bones!" A huge, hideous giant poked Beacon with the sword. "But a bite is better than nothing." Beacon's teeth began to chatter. The rest of him was too frightened to move. Then he remembered the speckled bull's last words. He pulled off his belt and flung it at the giant. As if it were alive, the bull's tail coiled like a snake about the giant's neck. The giant dropped his sword. "Call it off," he croaked. "Not ever," vowed Beacon. "Not." His eye fell on the giant's shiny buckled boots. "Until you give me those boots." The giant glared at Beacon, but he kicked off his boots. "Now, be gone and never come back," Beacon commanded. He climbed up the donkey, caught hold of the bull's tail, and yanked it like a bullpen. "Promise?" The giant's face turned purple. "Promise," he puffed. As soon as Beacon let go, the belt unwound. With a fearsome howl, the Arhak bounded over the wall and disappeared. Beacon buckled on the giant's huge boots. "Just my size," he said. Then, waving the sword, he led the herd home. So as you can see right here, the bull's magic is still working. So the bull's tail still is magic and helped to defeat the Arhak. Also, we know that Beacon has these big, large feet, so the giant's boots should fit him quite nicely. The other thing that you might notice that's a fairy tale feature that's similar in the Cinderella stories is that all of these evil characters keep disappearing, and they even say they disappeared. Sometime later, the gentleman told Beacon, "Stay home with the cows today. There's trouble coming to the town of Kinsale." "Trouble?" asked Beacon. "'Tis the day of the dragon." His master shuddered. "Every 7 years that wicked lizard rises from the ocean and swallows the fairest maiden in the land." "And what if she does not care for that?" Beacon asked. "Oh, she has no choice, for she'll be bound to a post. If she's not there, the dragon will blow the sea onto the land, wash away the village, and drown all the people." "That is trouble indeed. This year the lass is Princess Finola, the king's own daughter." He squinted at Beacon. "Don't you be thinking of going. The crowd might crush one as small as you." Going was just what Beacon had in mind. While his master slept, Beacon put on the giant's boots and thrust the sword into his bull-tail belt. Then he scrambled up on the donkey and rode off to Kinsale. Beacon spied the king's castle first, for it was perched high on a headland above the blue-green sea. As he trotted down the hillside into town, Beacon saw carts crowding the shore and a girl tied to a post at the water's edge. A band of gold circled her shiny black hair, and Beacon knew she was Princess Finola. The scene was a strangely sight. Only the voice of the princess was heard over the splash of the waves. "Will no one help me?" she pleaded. People looked away from her. Some hung their heads, but none moved. The reason why I think the town doesn't help her is because it's a sacrifice, which means they're risking her life to save the rest of them. But luckily, we've got this good character who's going to help out. I shall, cried Beacon, sliding from the donkey. "Let me sharpen my sword on that dragon. Look behind you," the princess screamed. Beacon wheeled about. The sea was bubbling as if coming to a boil, and suddenly a monstrous dragon burst from the water. Flames flashed from its mouth, and its barbed tail churned the waves to a froth. Scales plated its body like armor, and the nails on its toes were sharper than daggers. Beacon raised the giant's sword with trembling hands. "Beware, serpent!" he shouted, and the battle began. "Ooh!" moaned the crowd as the dragon almost caught Beacon in its claws. "Bravo!" cried the princess as Beacon's sword drew blood. But the creature acted as if the strikes from the sword were pinpricks. By afternoon, Beacon was so tired he could hardly lift the blade. Grasping his belt instead, he hurled it at the dragon. The bull's tail wrapped itself around the fiery jaws, tying them shut. The dragon snorted and heaved, but each move tightened the belt. Soon, only two thin streams of smoke curled from its nostrils. With a sizzle, the monster sank beneath the waves, taking the tail of the speckled bull down with it. As we can see here, the bull's tail is still working, and the magic is still happening. The magical bull's tail was able to shut the dragon's mouth and defeat him from being able to destroy the town and destroy the princess. People cheered and rushed to Beacon, almost crushing him, just as his master had warned. Then he heard, "Little Bigfoot," and saw his three stepsisters ready to pounce on him like three cats on a mouse. Beacon jumped on his donkey. "Wait!" cried Princess Finola. She reached for Beacon and caught him by the boot. "I want to thank you." "You're welcome, to be sure." Kicking the donkey, Beacon took off down the road, as if the dragon still chased him, and the princess was left holding his boot. So here we see another Cinderella feature. In all of the Cinderella stories, there's been something that the royal character has to be able to get them, track them down. And in the Disney Cinderella and in this Irish Cinderlad story, a shoe is used to find the good character. The next day, Beacon took his herd to pasture, just as always. But now he only had one boot. His bull-tail belt was gone forever, and the tip of the giant's sword was bent like a fishhook. Beacon dug a hole and buried the sword under an apple tree. "That's the end of it all," he said. But it wasn't. Princess Finola still had the other boot, and she was determined to find its owner. "I'll marry the one whose foot fits this boot, and none other," she insisted. "It was he, and he alone, who saved me from the dragon." The king sent a royal messenger to crisscross the country from sea to mountains with orders to find the owner of the boot. Many wished to wed the pretty dark-haired princess. Soldiers and sailors, fishermen, and farmers all tried on the shoe. Some stuffed the toe with sawdust, others used sheep's wool, and more than a few wore layer upon layer of thick-knitted socks. Still, the boot was too big for any of them. "'Tis giant size," they grumbled. We know that Beacon has those big feet, so that is going to fit only his large foot. A year passed before the messenger arrived at the gentleman's house. When Beacon's master slipped on the boot, it slipped right off again. "Let the lad have a go at it," he said. A cowherd. The messenger winked at the gentleman. But he handed the boot to Beacon. Why not? Of course, the boot fit Beacon as snug as his own skin. He kicked up his heel, grinned at his master, and said to the astonished messenger, "I've the mate to it in the cowshed." Soon enough, Beacon was on his way to Kinsale again, wearing both boots and astride the gentleman's fine horse. "How grand!" cried the princess when he arrived at the castle. "We're just the same height, sir, so I know we'll see eye to eye on everything." He grinned at her. "You can call me Beacon," he said, "for that's what my mother named me." "You shall be Princess Beacon," said Princess Finola. She hugged him, and the lad blushed as red as the hair on his head. And that's the end of the story. So, as you can see, a lot of fairy tale features were in this. There was the number 3. Obviously, it was fiction. We have good characters versus evil characters. We have a happy ending, and the bad characters die or disappear in this. So there are a lot of different bad characters and a lot of things that he had to overcome. But today's lesson is on comparing and contrasting. So let's talk about the similarities and differences between this story. So in the regular Cinderella story, the one that you might be used to, there was magic and there was a fairy godmother. But in this story, there's a different kind of magic. We also have magic, but we have a bowl. There's a magic bowl. So there's different kinds of things in both of these stories that are fairy tale features. Another thing that's in both of the stories is that both of the stories have magic. So we can put that in the middle box because that is something that they share. So the magic is different. Both of them have magic, but one has a fairy godmother and one has a magic bowl. Another thing that I'd like to add is that there are 2 evil stepsisters and 1 evil stepmother. That's in the Cinderella story. So we have that number 3. But in this story with Beacon, we have 3 evil stepsisters and 1 evil stepmother. However, both of them have a number 3. So there's 3 evil stepsisters and 3 evil characters. So both of them have the number 3. Sorry. There we go. Now, another thing that's in both of these stories is we have good versus evil. In Beacon's story, we have more evil. So we have evil that is, we have a giant, we have a dragon, we have a bull, and the step family members. But in the other Cinderella story, our evil characters are just those evil step family members. Okay? So these are showing you that there are similarities and differences in both of them and a lot of the fairy tale features that are in both. Now, one of the things that is definitely that's going in the middle is happy ending. Both of these stories have a happy ending. And both of them get married. Now, another big difference between these stories is that Cinderella is a boy in this story. And in this story, the other one, Cinderella is a girl. Now, this is a really important difference because a lot of people have misconceptions, meaning they feel differently, and they think that all Cinderella stories are about girls and princesses. But Beacon's story is about a boy who fights dragons and a bull and a giant, and there's a lot of differences between that. Another thing that is in this story is that Cinderella meets the prince at a ball. That is not the case in Beacon's story. Beacon meets the princess at the when fighting the dragon. So these are some real differences between the two stories. And one of the reasons why I think it's really important to show a Venn diagram of these two stories is to show you that, yes, they are both Cinderella stories, and the fairy tale features are very similar. But the actual story is extremely different. But if you notice something, the middle section, magic, the number 3, good versus evil, happy ending, and even fiction, are all fairy tale features that are in every single fairy tale. So that's just something that you might realize, that fairy tales, as long as they have this middle section, then the rest of the story can be completely different. Well, I hope you enjoyed reading the Irish Cinderlad today and learning about Beacon and his Cinderella story. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you guys later. Bye.